Hello, and welcome to the first episode of PlantCare.Club, where we care about your plants. On this show, we say we want to do three things. We want to accomplish these three things. Number one, we'll talk about your plants, indoor, outdoor, whatever you've got, as long as they're real. I won't. We won't talk about your plastic plants. If they're fake plants, we're not talking about that. That's not what we do here. Number two, we do product reviews. So we'll talk about soil, fertilizer, pots, new material that's coming to the market. Let's say you go to your local garden center and you see a new type of Monstera and you're like, hey, what's the deal with this? Send it to us. We'll do some research and we can tell you our opinion on it. And number three, we answer your questions. So if either through this show or in the future you have some questions and that you can't find an answer to anywhere, head over to PlantCare.Club. Search around on the site. You might be able to find the answer there. If you can't, no problem. Then send us a message and we will get back to you. So my name is Fred, and
My name's Maddie. I grew up on the greenhouse farm with Fred. We grew up with our dad owning a greenhouse farm, so watching plants grow and thrive and going to garden centers has been our whole life. And this is where we decided to do PlantCare.Club to bring that to you, bring this knowledge that we have. Now, Fred is more so a part of the greenhouse now than I am, so this is a learning opportunity for me as well as we go through all these shows.
yeah. Okay, I'm gonna say one thing. It was our both of our parents, our mom and our dad. Yes, shout out to mom. She's great as well. So yeah, my name's Fred, and I finished school. I have about 6 years of experience with the greenhouse that we grew up on. So we grow everything from spring annuals to garden mums and poinsettias. We have some filler crops in between there. And then we also have a nursery in Florida where we grow palms, ferns, mandevilla, and indoor houseplants, all of that kind of stuff. So the goal of this show is to take the information that we use in the greenhouse and to take what we have there, all the knowledge and all of the information, put it into a condensed format, and then tell you how you can apply it to the plants in your own home. So if you're wondering why the leaf on your plant is going yellow, or if you should be giving more fertilizer to your geranium, this is the right place to go. We're going to start with what we know in the greenhouse, and then by the end of the show, we're going to start to tell you exactly how to apply that to your own plants. So today, on this one, we're going to talk about where your plants come from. How do the plants actually get to the retail location?
Yes,
So,
perfect. And I'm gonna kind of help to keep us on the why this matters to the consumer during this podcast because that's a big part of like why it matters to me as well. So I'm gonna kind of do that for you guys. So, Fred, let's start off by talking about the plant origins. Like, where do our plants come from? How are they grown? How do they like, get to our homes? That's what we kind of want to start with.
yeah, okay, so at the beginning, and now if you're watching online, if you're watching somewhere, you can see the pictures that I have here. So these are two pictures from what we call a tissue culture lab. A lot of the tissue culture labs are from Asia or Europe. There are some, now, of course, there are some across the country. There'd be some in Canada, the US, anywhere else, but most of them clump into Asia, if I'm gonna clump one region. And what they do there is it is like a lab. It is like what you would see for any like a chemical or a bio company where they have all of these plants and they're trying to take them, they're trying to recreate them, go from, one set of genetics and then clone that plant into many, many, many more. So, in a very crude general sense, if a breeding plant company really likes the genetics of a plant, they might take that plant and then they would chop it up into a whole lot of little bits, really, really tiny bits, and then they send them over to Asia, or maybe in Asia they do that, and they chop it all up. They've got all these little pieces. They throw them all into little petri dishes. They start to let them grow and become an actual plant. And now, instead of having one plant with one set of genetics, now you have 100 or 1,000 plants with all the exact same genetics. And they can start to grow from there. And now you've gone from one plant to 1,000. And if you do it again, then you might go from 1,000 to 10,000 or whatever. Now listen, if you are a plant professional, and you just heard me say that, you may be yelling at your screen. And I'm just saying this is a general way to understand how it works. And if you're at home and you're listening and you're saying like, okay, I want more information on this because this sounds interesting, but like dive deeper, let us know because we know the people that we can get on the show that can answer those kind of questions.
So I'm going to ask a question.
Yeah.
Difference between doing something like this and cuttings. Why would you want to do this rather than just taking a cutting of a plant and replanting it?
So the reason that you do this is because in general there may be less plants that you love the genetics on.
Okay.
So if you have a very rare plant, like you're going along and you have most of your Monstera are all just regular green Monstera, and then all of a sudden, for some weird genetic freak reason, you've got a Thai constellation Monstera, like the variegated Monsteras. Once you see that, they would say, "Oh my gosh, we have to try to clone this plant specifically." So they take that plant and then they send it out, and they want to have that plant continue, chop it all up and use that plant specifically with a cutting process. Now, and remember, you're going from one plant to say 1,000 plants
Yep.
or that kind of a scale,
Okay.
and it takes a long time. With a cutting process, which is I think what we're going to talk about next, but with that process, you might be able to do one plant can yield 10,000 or 20,000 or 100,000 cuttings over, maybe not 100,000 is a little bit high, but it's a lot more cuttings during the course of a year, and you can do it on a larger scale. So this is the slow way. It really is a very slow way of getting the ball rolling. It takes a lot of time, but this is how they start with a lot of new varieties of houseplants. This is kind of where the origin would be. Most annuals don't come from this kind of a stage. They will come from the cutting stage. But for most of your houseplants, this is kind of where the original first step beginnings come from.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay, so
All right. So yeah, next let's talk about, okay, we've got like where these plants that we've got 1,000 of our little plants started. Now, what's the process from there? They're shipped here, that they put in a greenhouse. Can you talk more about that?
okay, so if you are growing, if you are trying to do 1,000 of a certain type of houseplant, and it's a very rare plant, that can satisfy the need. But now think about something like garden mums or poinsettias.
Okay.
Now, a lot of the country, Canada, US, across Europe, a huge portion of the world is going to want poinsettias or garden mums at the exact same time. So you can't do that whole process of, oh well, we're gonna do 1,000 plants and then ship them out because that's just not simply enough.
Yeah.
So what you would see here, and if you're listening, picture a whole lot of plants in a big long row that are all completely green. They're all numbered, and this is a farm that you would find probably somewhere in South America or Africa. That's where a lot of these type of farms are. And you would grow a plant from that little tissue culture or from a baby. It would grow up to be a bit larger, and now you can harvest cuttings. So you're cutting the ends of it off, you're cutting the tops off, and then from those cuttings you can actually package that up and ship it to a greenhouse or a grower or a nursery or someone like that that's going to do the next steps on it. So this is the other route that a lot of annuals, garden mums, as I mentioned, poinsettias, those really big crops that happen all at once, this is the way that they're going to be produced and shipped.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. So this is like a different way that they can be shipped to the greenhouse in the end, basically.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, exactly.
Okay, and it's a little bit of a faster process. Okay, perfect. So now they're being shipped. Now these are going to be sent to the greenhouse from here. This is the next step?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
So
let's dive into that.
next up, so what you see here is either a greenhouse or a nursery, one of the two. So generally what's happening now is these plants will go from the farms to a greenhouse where they're going to be rooted. Some greenhouses specialize in this. So they say, you know what, we don't even want to grow plants for the end consumer. We want to grow plants. We want to be that little bit of an in-between. We take the very baby plants that show up from South America or Africa or wherever else. We root them into trays and then we actually sell that to the greenhouse. So that might be the next stop, the next step that a lot of these plants go. Or, you know what, I didn't even mention it, but it could go from Asia to some of these or a tissue culture lab to some of these greenhouses. They're going to put roots on it. They're going to make it a little small plant, but now it's more hardy. It's kind of ready to go, and then they sell it out from there.
Would you say the less stops it makes to get to one of, let's say, a 6-inch pot, the sturdier the plant would be because it hasn't had to go through as much, like, traveling? It might not have the right temperatures. Plants don't usually like that.
The plants really can go into shock
Okay.
in like if they are going from one place to another, they have to be kept at the right temperatures. But the with the ability that we have now to ship plants and especially ship young plants, I don't think that that's as much of an issue anymore.
Okay.
A lot of the plants that will show up, the small young plants that haven't been rooted, they will come with some kind of a temperature gauge or maybe a little like a USB. It looks like a USB stick,
Okay.
but it tracks the temperature of the inside of that box. So when it shows up, you can plug it into your computer and you can see exactly what the temperature was as it was coming across the ocean or as it was flying over.
Okay.
So that's another way that's a way that they have attacked that problem. As far as being sturdier, I don't think so because that's something that happens later on in the plant's life. Like after it's into the 6-inch pot, that's when you're going to start to make the plant a little bit sturdier or stronger. You could reduce that crop time. So maybe something to think about, or yeah, something to think about is when you are putting that plant into a bag and then it's being shipped, or it is going from one greenhouse to another, or just going on a longer trip, those plants go into shock.
Yeah.
And it can be, or even from the tray to the actual pot, those plants go into shock at every step. So if you were able to take a cutting and root it and then put it into a larger pot and do all of those steps all in one place, you could probably reduce the time to grow that plant from baby to the finished product by a week or two, depending on exactly what type it is.
Okay, yeah. So for the shock part, which I'm sure like we're going to talk a lot about
Hmm.
because when plants go into shock, it does cause a lot of like different little issues that, that's going to be part of like the doctoring of the plant. But that's good to know. So maybe the less shock that it's in, the faster it'll grow. The like in a timeline, it'll grow faster because it doesn't need to like get out of that shock before it can continue.
Yeah, yeah. And so, okay, thinking about how you can apply that to your own home,
Yeah.
if you're going to take, if you have a 2.5-inch plant and you really love it and you say, it's doing so well, its roots are all the way to the bottom of the pot, and I think it would be happier in a 6-inch or in a 10-inch pot. Awesome, great. You're gonna throw it into that pot. Don't be surprised if it sits there and does nothing for a couple of weeks because that plant's probably going into shock. It's saying, "Oh my gosh, what is going on?" It's a defense mechanism that the plants really have where as soon as they have a new home, they're going, "Okay, what's going on? Maybe don't move, stay still."
Yeah.
And then once it notices, "Oh, I'm fine. There's more dirt below me. I can keep going. I can spread my legs."
Okay.
Then it starts to say, "Okay, cool. We can move forward."
Perfect. Okay. Sounds great. Love it. Okay, so we've got these plants in the greenhouses now. Now I want to know, how am I getting this to me? How is this plant going to arrive in my home eventually?
Yes. Okay. The next step, once it's rooted, and I guess the slides that if you're watching along, these slides are simply the trays and the end plug. So when it shows up to the greenhouse, they're probably rooted into some of these trays that you see here. And eventually the plant shows up like the one on my right. If you're listening along, this looks like maybe a macho fern. Could be a Kimberly or a macho, one of the two. But it is in a very small little plug of soil. It's got roots all the way to the bottom. So it's a very baby plant. This is ready to be sent over to any greenhouse. Okay, sorry, what was your question again?
No. So yeah, I'm gonna add to that last slide too. If you're listening along and you can't see it, these plugs are about like the size of like the length of your finger. Like they're very very small, and these trays hold. How many would you say would be in a tray?
Somewhere between 100 and 300.
Yeah. So like they're not necessarily the plants that you're gonna see in your home, but like this is what you take to place into a larger pot that's going to grow from. But yeah, 100 to 200 in this little tray, like just for reference.
Hmm.
Okay, so great. We've got these trays where all these plants have been put in now. So we've basically gone from like 1,000 to let's say 100 in a tray. 100 in a tray, they go into, is there a certain size pot? Is there, like, what happens there? How do you choose that, A? And B, then how does it go to a store for me to purchase?
Yes, okay. So I've got if you're watching online, bunch of pots behind me. If you are listening, there's anywhere from like a 2.5 inch pot up to a 10 inch pot. So depending on the variety of plant, it's going to go into a different size pot.
Hmm.
If it's a compact small variety, it's going to go into a small pot. If it's a really big one, it's going to go into a bigger pot.
Okay.
Very simply, that's all that it is. So it's going to go into whichever pot the end consumer is looking for, or if there's a deal between the retailer, let's say it's Home Depot and a nursery that supplies Home Depot, they've got a deal, they've got a program where it says, okay, I want a few, a certain number of 6 inch Sansevieria, a certain number of 6 inch Monstera, 10 inch Hope Salome, all those kind of things. So you're going to put it into the right pot. It shows up in that little plug. You throw it in. You get your timing right. So maybe it takes a month to grow. Maybe it takes a year to grow. Who knows what it is?
Okay.
You throw it into the right pot. And then as it's going to grow, it's going to keep getting bigger and bigger, getting ready to go into the actual store. And then this is how generally most plants are shipped to stores. So this is what you would call a shipping rack. If you've seen plants in Costco, I think just about every Costco has this format. So if you're listening along, we've got 2 layers on a cart. Both layers are the exact same type of plant. One of them is a 2-1 mass cane. The other one is 10-inch Sansevieria. And all that it is just a cart filled with these plants. So they're all very uniform. They're all hanging out. They look really good. Pots are ready to go. Plants are up to size. They're up to spec. These plants are ready to go to the store and be sold there. But it's not just on racks. They can be shipped in boxes, in box bins. Like think about watermelon bins. There's a huge number of ways that they can be shipped to the actual end store. So it just depends on what the retailer is looking for and what the grower is able to provide.
Totally. And even if you have like a really small like mom and pop shop or something like that, it could even be sent in like a van. Like it's not even being
Oh, of
transported in a
course.
box or anything like that.
Yeah.
And also, so some of these plants as well, when you see them in the store, they'll be in sleeves because if we're not talking about tropicals, well, if we talk about something like a poinsettia or a geranium, you might see them in the store and they'll be covered in a plastic sleeve, which just helps with basically that shock factor, right?
Hmm.
Okay, perfect.
Yes. So, okay, you brought up a really good point there. So, yeah, you've got sleeves. And as we're talking about all of these different steps, I think the key point that might be coming to your mind and what's coming to my mind is how many different times of this plant is really being shocked. So, it's going from being really happy to being chopped up, and then it starts to grow again, and then maybe there's cuttings taken from it, and then it gets shipped somewhere else, it gets rooted, then it gets repotted, and then it's starting to go, and then it gets put on another rack, and it might sit inside of a truck for 2 or 3 days before it actually gets to the end store.
Yeah.
So there's so many different ways that this plant is going into shock and shock and shock and shock. And then the last step is you're picking it up from the retail store or the garden center, you're bringing it home, you're throwing it into what you think is the best place in the house, but that plant might once again go into shock, be kind of surprised, and say, okay, I need a little bit of time to relax. I know that we've seen this on I've had a lot of questions on fiddle leaf figs. In general, a lot of people have problems with
Yeah.
fiddle leaf fig or Ficus lyrata. Generally, a bunch of family members have lyrata standards in their home, and they get it into their home and they say, hey, Fred, I see that, I've got a few brown leaves here and there. What's going on? And in general, my go-to response is shock. Most likely, it's some kind of, whoa, what's going on? Why am I in this brand new environment? I don't, I need some time. The other way that you can really solve that is to give it some more time. Give it 2, 3 weeks. You know what I should do? We should do something on the like what a doctor would say as steps in order to solve a problem,
Totally.
because we have generally when people are asking a question, they're saying, hey, what's wrong? And I kind of have to go through every sort of step in order to get to that end process. So we should do some kind of a show on explaining, okay, if you were going to the doctor, here's how a doctor would diagnose you. Okay, you're calling in about a problem with your plant. Here's how we can kind of diagnose it.
Totally.
Yeah.
Okay, that's
So
really
anyway,
good.
long way of me saying, if you got a plant, you just brought it in. It's looking a little meh. Give it some more time. Maybe it needs a month to really grow.
And just leave it. Like sometimes I feel like the initial reaction and the scare is I just got this beautiful plant, I paid money for it, and there's a brown leaf on it. You move it, you change the lighting, you want to change the soil, you give it more water. It's too much for the plant to even take. That's even shock probably. Like
Hmm.
if you just leave it alone, let it adapt to where it's at. You know, water when it's suggested to be watered, but just like give it some time. Exactly, give it a month before you start making all these drastic changes because the more you do it, the more shock you're putting your plant through. You don't even recognize
Absolutely,
it.
absolutely. Yeah, if you start to see that your plant has a brown leaf and you go, "Oh no, I'm gonna change four more things. I'm gonna give it fertilizer. It's gonna go to a new spot in the house. I'm gonna drop our temperatures by 4 degrees." And
Yeah,
you know, all of a sudden the plant's going, "Holy smokes, I can't. I wasn't adapted to before. Now I'm definitely not adapted." So, mhm.
definitely. Okay, perfect. Okay, so now I've seen these plants in the store, so they've been shipped to the store, for example. I'm taking it to my home. What are some considerations? So we just kind of talked about shock, but if I'm taking it to my home, there's also the shock of like taking it from even my car into the house, right? Like for a poinsettia, for example, that wind whip alone
Mhm.
can really damage your plant when you don't even recognize it. So what are some considerations that I need to keep in mind once I've purchased my plant from the greenhouse?
Well, you're gonna really want to keep to research. Maybe tune into this show. It's a shameless plug there, but you're going to have to do some more research into what that plant is looking for. As you mentioned, the poinsettia. Poinsettias are grown in a very warm climate, all the way from start until the finish. They're in a retail chain or a garden center, still pretty warm. If you throw them into your car and then you go in and get groceries somewhere else, or you leave them in your car for an hour or two, they might die. They really might, especially if it's in a cold place. They might not like that. So you've got to be aware of what that plant is looking for when you bring it home. A lot of annuals, are they going to want direct sunlight? Are they going to want partial sunlight, morning, afternoon sun? All of those kind of things are important. If you bring home some more tropicals, are they going to want, do they go through a lot of water or do they not go through much at all? Do they want to be under grow lights? Do they not need that much light? There's a ton of considerations. I cannot begin to really go into all of them because
No.
there's so much stuff, but it's going to be on a case by case basis. Do a little bit of research, look around because there's lots of information out there. And if you have any questions, send us a message and we can help you out.
And usually those plants will come with a tag as well. Usually. And it gives you some of the most basic information though, just like how often you water it, sun or shade, where you should put it,
Hmm.
that kind of thing. One thing I've noticed before too is pansies in the springtime. When I gift pansies to friends or family, I'll notice that they leave their pansies in their house, and pansies really aren't made for being in your home. And they'll wonder like, why is my pansy dying? And I'm like, this is not actually meant to
Hmm.
be in your home. So little things like that too when you don't even recognize it. Obviously they're trying to take the best care they can of their plant, but yeah, it's not thriving because it's not in the environment it's supposed to be in. So another consideration I'd love to talk about is just like different greenhouses and different nurseries, which actually first, can we dive into the difference between a greenhouse and a nursery?
Okay. Greenhouse in general, they have plastic over the roof. So if you are anywhere out of, let's say, South Florida, and I think that there are some in something like California on that coast
Okay.
where it doesn't freeze. If it doesn't freeze, you can grow plants under basically direct sunlight, or they have like that black shade cloth over the roof.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's like 8 or 10 feet up, and you can grow plants directly either in sunlight without any plastic covering, without any walls on it. Now, once your climate is more susceptible to freezing, even from the middle of Florida all the way up, you're going to have a greenhouse. So a nursery is what we refer to as, you know, South Florida, probably some in the on the West Coast, like in California. A greenhouse we call something with a plastic roof. That's all.
Okay. Nurseries outdoors more so, greenhouses enclosed,
Yeah.
basically. Okay, awesome. So the difference between different nurseries and different greenhouses where you might be purchasing these plants, or where these plants, sorry, might be going to the store itself, also can create a different environment that's like outside of your what you can take care of as a consumer, but it's something to consider that like this poinsettia that you got versus the one that your cousin got, totally could have come from completely different places, completely different environments. This poinsettia could have had a longer travel time to even get to the store. And also, the greenhouse could have been like 5 degrees colder, which also can make a difference. Like, there's so many little variables, and it's just something to keep in mind that, like, you happen to get a certain plant that maybe didn't thrive when you brought it home, but some of those things are completely out of your like what you could have done to take care of that plant, and it's just the luck of the draw sometimes. But that's another good idea for an episode of like what to look for when you're at a store picking out a plant, is to how to kind of be able to tell the difference between those kinds of plants.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you've got the way that growers will the approach the growth of a plant from the beginning all the way to the very end is different for every single one of them. Some of them like to have things cooler, some of them like to have it warmer, some like to use a growth regulator, some don't.
Yeah.
So there's all of those different factors. And oh, another really important one that people don't often think about is some growers use certain varieties in small pots that
Mm-hmm.
encourage those plants to stay small. Others will use the same variety in a small pot and a very big pot, and then all of a sudden your 4-inch plant that you wanted to stay small and compact is really big. Well, it might be just a different variety from what the grower used last year. So there's a
Totally.
lot of little things in there that can be confusing, and you might say like, what is going on here? But
Yeah.
that's likely what the reasoning is.
Definitely. And like this is not always the case. I want to emphasize that before I say this is not always the case, but sometimes when you're purchasing a plant, price does matter. Like if you're going to be buying a cheap plant, there's probably a reason that it's very cheap. That's not always the case, but that tends to be something that you see. Now sometimes too, plants are very overpriced and they're not necessarily the best quality, but that's something that you can also kind of keep in mind, where if you're getting a if you think, oh, this is a fair price, you're probably going to be getting a good plant out of that. If you're getting a cheap plant, tends to be probably a reason that you're getting that discounted plant. Yeah. Sorry,
Yeah.
anything to add to that?
Well, no, I don't have too much. It just depends on where you're going.
Yeah,
Like different
exactly.
retailers are going to have different specs, different expectations of their growers.
Definitely.
So,
Okay, so awesome. We know how we're getting our plants now. Are there any exceptions to this plant growing journey? I'd like to dive into something like that.
yeah, okay. So, a few that I wanted to talk about were if you look above my head there, there's cordyline. If you are listening along, cordyline, you would have to look up, you would have to search exactly what a cordyline looks like. But what you're seeing is if you went up your cordyline plant and then you just cut the new growth off of it, that is a new cutting, and that cutting generally cordyline come from those kind of cuttings. You would stick them directly into like say a 10-inch pot, 3 of them in there or 4 of them in there, whatever you're going to do. They root relatively easily, and from there they will take off. So they can skip that kind of a step of the rooting inside of a tray. Same with, let's say, pineapple plants. So with a pineapple plant, they will take the head of a pineapple. So like let's say you just bought a pineapple from the store. If you cut the head off of it, you eat the rest, but then you actually take the head, you shave it down so that you can set it inside of the soil of, let's say, a 10-inch or a 6-inch pot. And you set it there for long enough, really good at rooting it, it'll actually start to root out. And eventually it'll open up enough that you can shoot a new pineapple out of it. Sansevieria is another interesting one. So Sansevieria is very similar to a cactus. The cuttings will come in around, let's say you want the plant to finish around 2 or 3 feet tall. You can order in cuttings that are about 2 or 3 feet tall.
Okay.
So when we think about cuttings, you think about something very small, but this is like 2 or 3 foot long pieces. You take that 2 3 foot long piece, you shove it into the dirt. Maybe you put 3 or 4 in there to fill out the 10-inch pot. And as soon as they've rooted, as soon as they shoot roots all the way through the pot, now you're good to go and you can sell it. So instead of having something really little come in that you have to wait for it to put on 2 or 3 feet of height, all you have to do is wait for the roots to set, and then you can sell it. So there's different strategies that growers use in order to get that.
Yeah, and another example too would be the cactus, right? You were telling me about this not long ago, where they take the basically if you have a leaf of the cactus, they kind of almost cut it in a triangle, and then you reroot it, and that will also create a whole new cactus out of that plant, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Well, you can take the ears off of a cactus too.
Yeah.
Let's say you have, if you're, I'm just thinking of like a generic styled cactus.
Yeah.
Eventually, new growth will come off the sides. If you just pluck some of those off, you can throw it right back into the soil, and it can root from there. So there are some cool exceptions. A lot of them are tropical plants.
Yeah.
A lot of them are indoor house plants and tropical plants that are the exceptions to the rules. But I wanted to talk about this because it emphasizes that not all of the plants in your home follow the same script.
Totally. And what I'd love to talk about too is, for example, in our greenhouse, ever since we were young, we've done poinsettia cuttings, right? So we've had what they call the mother plant, which is the original plant that we've gotten from the process that we're kind of talking about, right?
Hmm.
It starts like that. And then we take that entire bay of poinsettias, we cut cuttings, and that's how we fill our greenhouse almost to continue that process. So, what's the benefits to doing something like that over bringing in those plants from Asia or wherever that are
Hmm.
all like the thousand plants basically? Yeah.
So specifically for poinsettias, you can either order in your cuttings, so you can get all the cuttings that come in, and so we do that a lot, or you can have your own mother plants. So instead of buying everything from a farm in Ecuador or Mexico or Africa, wherever it is, we try to have some of our own, they call them stock plants, and we harvest cuttings from them. The advantage to that is we know that we're going to get those cuttings.
Yep.
Eventually, some years you'll have a problem with, oh no, there's an issue with say a drought, or there's some kind of a bug issue, or an infestation, or a big loss, or bacteria, some kind of a problem that runs through a big variety of plants, and you cannot get your plants
Okay.
because they simply do not exist.
Yeah.
You've got 100 million cuttings that are ordered for a certain variety across the world, and now all of a sudden there's only 50 million. Well, there's going to be some pretty upset people. Now, if we do it on our own, we have that ability to control our own destiny a little bit there,
Okay.
right?
We also would run the risk of what if something happened to our little crop and we wouldn't be able to continue that going on too.
Hmm.
Would you say if like also we know we can kind of be more in control of how that plant was grown, and then we know we're getting a really good sturdy, I keep using that word, but
Hmm.
like a healthy cutting that we know is going to be a pretty strong plant if we because we took it from a strong mother plant to begin with, right?
Yeah, well, we can change the size of our cuttings. So we can say, hey, we want to have longer cuttings or shorter cuttings. So
Mm-hmm.
we can definitely do something along those lines. Another thing is you've for growers, you want to think about what kind of chemicals were used on that plant before you got it. If there were some chemicals that were used to kill certain bugs and it shows up to the greenhouse, I see a certain bug and I say, oh, I really want to take care of that. And I use the same chemical that they used before. That plant might already, those bugs might already be resistant to that chemical, so they
Oh,
might not react to it at all.
that's interesting.
So for a grower, you have to be, with what we're doing, we can be a little bit more the aware of what chemicals we're putting on, when we're applying them, how resistant they are. We're a little bit more cognitive of exactly what's in that plant and what that plant is filled with versus if you buy them all from somewhere else. Now, the reason that everyone doesn't follow the same idea is it takes more time.
Yep.
It's harder. So you're paying attention to something else that, we're starting to grow these poinsettias in May when we have a lot of other plants in the greenhouse. So it takes our attention away from some other crops that we could put our attention to. And the last thing is it takes up space, and not everyone has the ability to do that.
Yeah. Okay.
It just fits in with what we're doing.
Totally. And like, how does this apply to the consumer? Well, this is a good idea to understand like your plant and how some greenhouses, for example, can be you have their finger on the pulse of basically that entire growing process,
Hmm.
which is very interesting. Okay, so we could dive into this for ages, but just yeah, I think that this is a really great way to kind of understand how this whole entire process works, and a great way to dive into that start and end position. Is there anything else we want to add on to like really own in on why this matters to the consumer, why this matters to you listening at home, looking at your plant that you just bought, and you like something that they would want to know?
Okay, I thought of one thing. One other thing that we haven't mentioned. If you are at home and you've tried to propagate some plant and you see a how-to video online and you think, oh, I'm going to do this, and it doesn't work, do not be upset with yourself because we've gone over this huge long process of how commercial greenhouses that make their living do this, and it goes from this person's a specialist in this, and this person's a specialist in this, and this person, and essentially, if you're doing it at home, you're going all the way through that entire process. You're going from start to finish, which is so hard. It's a very difficult thing to do. So if you failed at propagating something, or maybe it died, don't beat yourself up for it, because it's a really hard thing to do, and it's hard for growers to do it themselves.
Yeah.
So if you can't do it at home, yeah, don't beat yourself up.
It's a very tedious process, and you don't have access to all the exact same lighting, chemicals, all those things that
Yes.
a greenhouse does. All right, I actually do have one final question before we close out.
Yep.
We were talking about chemicals and how we use them on plants, and every greenhouse does so. But what do these chemicals? Can they harm me? Can they harm my animal? If I bring this plant home and it's been sprayed with something to kill bugs, do I need to be worried about that? Do I need to be like wiping my leaves off? Do I need to be cleaning it somehow?
So certain plants are a little bit more toxic than others.
Okay.
There are different toxicity levels within plants, and that's toxic to humans or dogs or whatever. Example that I usually give to people is my dog Oliver and our greenhouse dog Wadsworth.
Yeah.
So we have two dogs, and they are in the greenhouse every single day. And Oliver was a lab when he was a lab, and he is a lab, sorry, and he was a puppy. He was a puppy, obviously.
Yeah.
And we saw him eat things, and we saw him eat plants, and he ate many mandevilla, mandevilla.
Yeah.
He ate poinsettias. He ate anything that you can think of. He's a lab. If any of you have had labs out there, they eat everything. They just chew on everything, and he's fine. As far as I can see, he's fine. He's actually sleeping over there. He's completely fine. So when a plant has some toxicity, the amount that someone would have to eat in order to have a real problem is very, very, very high. If you go and buy a 12-inch poinsettia that is, about 12 inches wide, and then let's say it's 24 inches tall, about 2 feet tall, a dog or a cat would have to eat the whole thing in order to really get to a spot where they would get sick. Now, please, I'm not a doctor. Don't, if your dog or cat does this, like, please don't sue me. Don't come after me. I'm not this is not medical advice in any way. I'm not a vet, not anything like that. But the relative toxicity levels, they are pretty low. So your kids, your pets, yourself, you don't have to be very concerned about it as long as you're not ingesting it. Even if your pet's ingested a small amount, they're going to be okay. Just like my dog. Yeah, he's a little bit crazy here and there, but he's totally fine.
Okay, so generally speaking, if I'm bringing this plant home, I don't need to be worried about chemicals and stuff. Like, you usually would be fine. Your
Yep.
plant, your pet is going to be fine too, so that's good to know.
Agreed.
Okay, amazing. So this has been really great. We understand like where the plants come from, how we get it into our home, why it applies to us, and all the steps in between. This has been really great. If you guys have any questions about this episode, you've had thoughts while you've been listening, and you're like, oh, I'd really love to know about blank, head to PlantCare.Club. Yes, it's the name of our company, but that's also our website. So if you type that in, there's a question box in there. Send us your questions, and we'd be happy to answer any of your questions.
Yeah, it's not .com too. It's .club. When did they start that? Like, is that a newer thing? Because it was always .com when I was growing up, and then you started to see like .ai for some like
.io.
.io were
Yeah.
a big thing, and then .club is one that was available, and PlantCare.com, as you can imagine, was already taken. So we want to have people that can help each other with their own plants, so we decided to go with Club.
Yeah, so it's perfect. So yeah, exactly. Like you said, it's not plantcare.club.com. Nuh-uh, that's not it. It's plantcare.club. Type that in, and you'll find us and ask us all your questions. We've also got some resources in there if you want to learn some more tips and tricks about your plants, and they're free resources, so you can grab those as well. And yeah, this has been amazing. Thanks, Fred.
Awesome. Thanks. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, guys.